important to know your camera inside and out. You should know where all of the important parts are and understand where all of the buttons and menus are located. One part that you'll find on every camera is the lens. So on my iPhone, it's in the front here, but yours might be somewhere else, so make sure you know where it is. Another kind of obvious one is the record button. You probably already know this, but record buttons are usually indicated by a red circle. On your iPhone, it's just right in the front here, but it might be somewhere else if you're working with a different camera, so make sure you locate it. Another important part of your camera is the microphone, if you're going to be recording sound and your footage together. On your phone, the microphone is usually at the bottom somewhere here. It's important to know this so that you don't accidentally cover it up with your hand or your homemade tripod if you're recording sound. A couple of other features you can look out for is the zoom function. So on your phone, you can zoom in and out, just like this, by using two fingers and pushing them together or pulling them apart on the screen. But if you're working with an actual camera with a lens on the front, the zoom is usually just right on the lens and you can twist it to zoom in and out. Again, depending on what you're using, just make sure you find that function because it's going to help you when you're developing your shot sizes. Another great feature that you might want to get familiar with is the slow motion option. A lot of phones these days have an option to shoot in slow motion, which is awesome. So on your iPhone, it's usually something called slow-mo right next to the video option. But it might be different if you're working with a different phone or a different camera, so make sure you find that. Slow motion can be really fun to work with, especially maybe if you're having an action hero running away from an explosion, or maybe somebody drops something and there's this really dramatic moment and you want to watch it fall in slow motion to the floor. So play around with that and have some fun. It's a great feature and you can get really creative with it. A lot of household cameras also have the ability to capture slow motion, but it's a bit more complicated. So if you're using something like this, maybe refer to your camera manual to learn more about this function. So now that you know your way around the camera, let's talk about some important things you'll want to keep in mind when you're shooting, because it's important to know how your camera is going to deal with these things. The first really important one is focus. Have you ever watched a video and noticed that all of the footage was out of focus? It's really distracting and it's definitely a mistake that you want to avoid. A camera works very similarly to how the human eye works. Have you ever tried staring at an object and you'll notice that everything in your peripheral or behind the object is kind of out of focus? But then you can start refocusing your gaze to what's behind the object and suddenly it's the object that's blurry and the background that's clear. This is exactly what happens with a camera lens, only it's our job as filmmakers to tell the camera what to focus on. When you're shooting with a camera like this, you can usually adjust the focus right on the lens. But when you're working with an iPhone, you'll use your screen to adjust the focus. So for the iPhone, all you need to do is tap on the object that you want to be in focus. So if I put my hand here, I can tap and kind of go back and forth between what's closer or what's farther in the background. Now you'll notice that with your phone, it's usually set to autofocus, and that's the last thing you want to be happening in the middle of your take. You don't want the focus to be readjusting right in that crucial moment of your film. So you can lock the focus on your phone. I don't know if you know this. But all you need to do is, so let's say I want to focus on my hands here in the foreground and leave the background kind of blurry. So I can tap and just hold the screen on my fingers, and you'll see this AEAF lock message appear. And that means that my focus is now locked. So no matter where I move or if the light changes, the focus will stay on the subject that I selected. Pretty cool. This might be different if you're working with a different phone, but just have a look at the manual and see if you can find this feature. Bear in mind that when you navigate away from this screen, or if you turn your phone on and off, it's going to automatically reset to autofocus. So you're going to want to do this focusing before each and every take that you shoot. The next big consideration to keep in mind for every camera that you might work with is the exposure. Exposure refers to the amount of light that we allow into the lens, and it helps the camera understand how bright or dark the image should be. Our eyes do this too, but they adjust naturally to light and darkness, whereas the camera needs to be told what to do. Have you ever seen a video where part of the image was just way too bright or even completely white? This happens really often with things like the sky, and it means that the exposure was not set correctly. The same can be said for underexposed images where the footage just looks like it's way too dim and dark. We want to aim for footage that is neither too dark or too bright, and we need to adjust our exposure for every single shot. So on your phone, if you're working with an iPhone, you adjust the exposure in the same way that you adjust the focus. So again, you would tap on the object and you'll see this little sundial appear, and that usually means in addition to focusing on the object, it's also going to expose for that object. And again, just like we did with the focus, we want to lock the exposure because we don't want it changing and shifting throughout our take. So what I can do is hold down my finger on the screen again until that AEAF message appears. It's a little bit fiddly, so there it goes. Might need to give it a couple tries. And then also keep holding your finger down, and if you move it up and down until you see these lines appear with the sun kind of right in the middle, and that means you can go up or down to kind of adjust the brightness or the darkness of your image. So if you're outside, that's a really handy one to know. Again, remember to do this before every shot. Sometimes you might be shooting a scene that's got one part of the image that's really bright, like the sky, and another part that's really dark, somewhere in the shadows. And you might be wondering where it's best to set your exposure. If you have to make this choice, the general rule of thumb is that it's always better to underexpose an image than to overexpose it. And that's because a lot of the editing software that exists out there right now has some features that can really help you to adjust an underexposed image and reintroduce some light. But unfortunately, those features don't really exist for overexposed images. So if an image is blown out, there's really not too much you can do to save it.